Well, good afternoon and good evening, to, and welcome to a panel conversation in relation to the wonderful exhibition that we've been so happy to host at Black Cultural Archives, States of Blackness, which opened hot on the heels of our Transforming Legacies exhibition at the start of this year. In conversation today, I will be your host. I am Lisa Anderson, Managing Director at Black Cultural Archives, and I am so pleased to be joined by four of the artists who are featured in this fabulous show, including Jasmine Morel, Alexis McGrigg, Jamal Ademola, and Stephanie Brown, alongside Jeremiah Ojo, who is the founder of Ilikunwa, the artist development consultancy that works with many of the artists who are in the show. And we want this to be a really lovely opportunity to have a conversation about the reason why we brought this show to Black Cultural Archives, to learn more about the artists and their practice, and to allow them to explore some of the similarities and differences between their practices and the concepts that they are inspired by. And just to be a general positive and uplifting conversation to give you an understanding of why at Black Cultural Archives we believe in the power of art to bring important conversations around history and culture to life. So I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit about Black Cultural Archives if you don't know about it already. Black Cultural Archives is the home of Black British history. It is the only national heritage organisation in the United Kingdom dedicated to the histories of people of African and Caribbean descent. We've been around for over 40 years now, and our mission is to collect, protect, preserve, and celebrate the histories of people of African and Caribbean descent in order to inspire and give strength to individuals, communities, and society at large. And we do that through three clear programmatic strands. The first is collect and activate, which speaks to the work we do with our treasure trove, our resource of archival material, which is used as a resource for knowledge production, research, culture production. So we're really here to see our archive material activated for the inspiration and empowerment of our audiences. The second programmatic strand is educate and inspire. At Black Cultural Archives, I'm really pleased to say that we every week deliver a range of workshops for a range of ages of students from primary school age, secondary school, and we also work with university students and adult groups. And finally, which is of real relevance to this conversation, our third strand is celebrate and champion, which is all about how we use creativity, especially artistic forms, to bring to life the conversations that our history holds and facilitates. And that is what brings me to this conversation tonight. Tonight, for those of you who are on the European side, and this afternoon for those of you who are stateside. Okay, so a little bit about the artists that we have in the show. Well, they all speak to the breadth of African diasporic experiences that we definitely want to cherish at Black Cultural Archives. And that's why they fit so perfectly with the title and theme of the show, which is States of Blackness. And as we describe this exhibition as an opportunity to express different perspectives of Blackness, to reflect on the different ways it's experienced through different artistic mediums, voices, and geographic states. And just to try and make you aware of why the home of Black British history is welcoming our brothers and sisters from um, America to express their experiences, I think it's important to show you and to tell you about the connection between Black Cultural Archives and America. We were founded by a phenomenal educationalist, Len Garrison, and one of his key inspirations was Queen Mother Moore, who some of the artists may know of, but it was a very influential activist and Pan-Africanist whose vision for a global approach to celebrating African diaspora history very much inspired the creation of Black Cultural Archives. In fact, our first name was the African People's Historical Monument Foundation. And she had a vision for different foundations to be located across the whole of the African diaspora. And we know that there's a clear exchange of culture between America and the United Kingdom. And finally, this exhibition really came into play for the start of the American Black History Month, which has been running in February for decades. And we thought that there would be a wonderful opportunity to facilitate that exchange of experiences during that month. Now, I had intended to do introductions to each of the artists, but we're already nearly 7 minutes in, and I feel like I've been speaking too much, and I think you're going to get bored with my voice. So I'm just going to read the screen and see whether the artists feel happy or not to introduce themselves, just to give people a bit of variety of experience of tone and energy as we kick off this conversation. How do you feel about that, guys? I want to put you on. You're cool to do that?
Yeah, sure.
Excellent. So I'm going to hand over to Jeremiah, actually, who is an artist, but he's not showing in the show, but has been the linchpin for introducing me to many of the artists who are featured in the show. And Jeremiah, would you like to do a little bit of an introduction to yourself?
Sure. Thanks so much, Lisa. Good evening to all of you local in London, the UK, Europe, and then hello to all my friends, fellow artists and creatives here in the States. I'm Jeremiah Ojo. I'm the founder of Ilekunwa, which means Our Door in Yoruba, and we are a social enterprise that cultivates and facilitates opportunities for artists of African descent to create, sustain, and thrive. I've had the great honor and pleasure to befriend many of the artists that you see on screen here and work with in various different capacities over the years, and given the opportunity to share their talents and connecting with my dear sister and friend Lisa, I was honored to make the introduction to help facilitate this exhibition.
Thank you. Okay, Alexis, let's hear from you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alexis McGrigg, currently based in Jackson, Mississippi. I am a painter and interdisciplinary artist, and my work typically focuses around spirituality, collective consciousness, Blackness, and thinking about ascension and the soul and the body and all those things and how they impact our life and our experience on Earth. So nice to be
Beautiful.
here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for your work. And over to you, Jasmine.
Hi, my name is Jasmine Merle. I first want to say thank you so much, Lisa, for inviting me and bringing all these lovely artists together. It's so wonderful to see Jeremiah as well again, see your beautiful face, and get introduced to all these new artists. I'm an interdisciplinary artist also. I work in a range from photography, film, to sculpture, to land art, um, and even um, pe- performance and with
Mhm.
wearables and things. Um, I'm so I'm so grateful anytime that I get a chance to talk about my work. My work in particular overall has a tendency to um, work in genres around myth and mythology and historical erasures. Um, Presently, I am for the last couple of years been working a lot with the the interspecies kind of relationship between plants and animals of people of African descent, and that has kind of manifested through film and sculpture in these larger projects. That's it. Thank you.
That's it, she says. And we just want to hear more. Okay. You're teeing us up nicely. Over to you, Stephanie.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Stephanie Brown. I am actively based in Atlanta, Georgia. I am also an interdisciplinary artist. My primary medium and like I like to say my bones are in photography. My work is very broadly reflective of self and ancestral exploration. I'm very passionate about understanding how people with melanated skin construct their identities, and I'm very interested in that across the globe. You see that reflected in the works that I create, specifically the photography that's on view in this exhibit as well. Um, are pretty signature for me in terms of these very contrasty black and white nudes. And I'm very fascinated about working with individuals and giving them an opportunity to discover themselves. So I found that through my practice and sharing my own journey into self discovery and how that connects to my own understanding my own identity as a first generation American of Jamaican heritage
What?
is
Sorry. Not sorry.
yeah. It's been a great way to pave way for other people of African descent to discover themselves through my work.
Beautiful. Thank you, Stephanie. And let's finish up with Jamal.
Um, I want to start off with saying thank you, Lisa and Jeremiah, so much for having me be a part of the show. My name is Jamal Ademola, and I'm an artist and filmmaker primarily based in Los Angeles. And I'm very interested in concepts of identity and dreams and how we manifest our consciousness and Blackness as the origins of consciousness. And uh, lately, I am interested in language and migration and primarily how language constructs our identity, um, and how growing up in Nigeria and the United States, there's a cross-continental sort of conversation that happens in my work, and I'm interested in how Blackness permeates in different cultures and how it's represented um, geographically through culture and language and those different permutations. So yeah, very excited to be here, and yeah, I'm looking forward to this talk.
Wow. Okay. I'm so struck by the similarities and the huge differences between you all, which I am perfectly comfortable with. And I think which speak to the complexity and uniqueness of the Black experience. It's so deep, so wide, so complex, so layered, and, limitless possibility for where we can theoretically express the potential of Blackness. But I want to zoom in on the fact that you were all interdisciplinary artists and to talk about how that reflects your own sense of personal identity and how you use your work to explore that in different ways. I'll start with that, and particularly because it relates to the title of States of Blackness, just the importance of your interdisciplinary practice for how you approach the question of various states of Blackness. Who would like to take that first?
No, I'd like to say some words about that. I mean, I've always thought of my work as hybrid, and I'm very fascinated with the concept of hybridity
Mm-hmm.
and belonging to different, ways of being, essentially. So there's like an intercultural exchange. Like I remember my own childhood growing up in Nigeria, in Lagos, Nigeria. I lived there for 10 years, and then coming to the United States. There was an extreme culture shock in the way blackness was perceived. So in Nigeria, there was, you're African, but when I came to the United States, I was just black. So there was this sort of cultural erasure in the way that you were seen. And
Mm-hmm.
I believe that happens geographically in lots of different areas, in Latin America, um, in parts of Europe, in the UK. So
Mm-hmm.
um, as part of being an interdisciplinary artist, that concept of hybridity, where you're pulling from different modalities, pulling from different ways of existing. So I find that in that way, I have a very interest in a lot of different mediums, and
Mm.
all of those different mediums express a singular voice. So that's my experience of it.
And to relate it to your work, then for those who haven't been able to experience it, we have a beautiful video work that obviously portrays this through the use of visual imagery, moving imagery, performance, poetry. Can you say a bit about how you pulled those different modalities together to create that work and why?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Lisa. So I dreamed of seeing myself as a film that I made in 2021 that premiered in a White Space creative agency in Lagos. It was curated by Ethel Utawe, who's a great artist herself. And in that work, I mean, it was inspired by the social justice protests of 2020, where George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor were viciously murdered. And for me and a lot of other people who were horrified in those moments, I think it, it felt like a collective affirmation, wanting to make something that was defiantly saying that this is not what blackness represents. Blackness is not just about trauma. Blackness is also about the origins of humanity, and it's also um, it's also the beyond, the infinity. So in the film, I'm very interested in the divine feminine, and the concept of the Yoruba concept of Iyami Aje, which is a cosmic um, mother figure that represents creation. So that those are some of the ideas that I'm making in the film.
Really beautiful. And I could really literally move to any of the other artists in terms of the connection between the imagery and the themes in your work to theirs. But I was toying between going to Jasmine and going to Alexis. um, but I'll go with Alexis because she's also got a moving image work in the show that has I've seen visitors entranced by in a similar way to your own work, just looking at it, because it involves movement, performance, interpretive dance, collage, imagery. So, Alexis, I'd love you to just respond to what you've heard Jamal say about the use of different modes to express, the range of states that we find ourselves having to negotiate.
Right. So I think for me, I'm always kind of like toying with this idea of modes of being and thinking about Blackness, and particularly for this work that's in the exhibition, um, that basically displays me doing an interpretive dance to the song called Strange Fruit by Nina Simone. When I made that work specifically, it was around the time when There was the murder of Mike Brown, and sometime after that, there was Sandra Bland, and all of this information we were being kind of overcome with these visuals and images of the murder of Black people, and I just couldn't disconnect from it. And I stumbled across this song called Strange Fruit by Nina Simone, and it was my first time hearing it, and hearing it in my studio, and trying to connect it with this idea of modes of being. I'm always sort of aware that Black people in the US or even throughout the diaspora, we're always constantly in this state where we're having to shapeshift. We're always having to transform in order to survive. Um, and in making this work, I was thinking about these sort of layers of our perception of things, and how we're trying to sort of navigate the world in a way that helps us find some sort of comfort. And there's this layering of these different types of emotions all happening at one time. And while um, as a viewer, we're looking at it and we're connected to it, we're always connected to it. It's like we can never disconnect from what's happening to someone else is also happening to us at the same time. Um, and so there was these feelings of anger or disbelief, and also at the same time hope, and trying to use this moving image to examine that. I was quite literally just using my body to express these various emotions, and also trying to think about it as some sort of relief, allowing me to have some sort of alternate space that I could project myself into as a place of solace. Because in thinking about the murder of Black people as like a sort of contemporary lynching, um, it was really disorienting. And thinking about that, having these various modes of being, and also thinking about this ascension as being sort of a forced disconnection of our soul from the body. I always felt very disoriented by hearing about or seeing these images of these contemporary lynchings. And so it really made me sort of like sit and think about, what is that like? Because I feel it, and I can't disconnect from it. And I see these images as a forced disconnect of our soul from the body. And so, that began to kind of expand into this relation to celestial space, and thinking of alternate worlds as a place for solace. And so it was really just kind of the beginning of this development of thinking about modes of being and temporality, and the tension of having to just walk and live here on earth.
Oh yeah.
Wow. It does that. What's so profound is that your your work gives us space and stillness to make sense of that frantic shape shifting that we have to do.
Mhm.
And the products of your own like rendering of all this confusion, frustration, dislocation is a stillness, is a space, is a moment of relief, in a similar way to the way that Jamal's work operates. And so I have to say thank you again for creating this work, for bravely putting yourself in the center of that work, because not only for that moment of relief, but in terms of what the Black Culture Archives aims to do is help people make sense of the images, help people make sense of the archive. What is this information that we're gathering and having to interpret on our own, or not, or the information that's not being gathered and housed? How can we put it in a safe space, in a context that's honoring our communities, and give people space to make sense of it and breathe? So it's really profound, and I love the way that you said that. So then there's the two beautiful artists who have photography in the work left to communicate, and I was struck by the way in which Jamal and Alexis used movement, literally through their works, and not only movement but the layering of images through their video works, and how I was thinking about how both Jasmine and Stephanie use light as layers through their work, through their photography, in the way that they evoke senses of intimacy, stillness, in to kind of convey these questions of states of blackness. But I'm going to start with Jasmine first, because not only in terms of light and color do you do that, but also in materiality, because you have a very distinct, one of your, I think, best known series of work that features, which you were alluding to, the use of natural products and our relationship to them, and how that they can be in conversation with the Black body. So, can you say a little bit about
Sure,
your approach?
sure. Um, I want to also combine your previous question about interdisciplinary,
Yes, please.
um, and I'm always thinking about how everything more and more is connected. You
Mm-hmm.
know, everything is really kind of connected, and what we say is really like spells. They're really, really important. It's also about what we think and what we manifest.
Yes.
And I, at that moment in time, was in grad school, and sometimes I feel that a lot of times I was making work in a response to annihilation, to a response to oppression, power. And I
Mhm.
was really forgetting about like that, my own power and my own community power. And so I'm originally, I was born in Detroit. Um, a lot of the women that I work with, I've been working with my whole life. And I
Mm-hmm.
usually, they're women that are over 65 now and into 104 and 5. And the reason why I was working with them is because as a child and growing up in Detroit, there was this kind of, multi um, complexity of the Black life, of these like, Black artists, and or even my father working and having this little side hustle and multiple kinds of different identities and doing different things. And so the women, that particular woman I've been working, she's from Mississippi, and my first job was actually at the Opera House, and I was working with all of these diva, like, over the top, older Black folks, like extravagant and loveliness, and um, and at the same time they were working, they were artists, they were working, a side job, and they were doing all of these kind of just magical things at the same time, and while cooking and while being a wife, and and I was just really, and I'm still kind of like, um I'm just so inspired and mystified by the mundane, and these, these things that we think are really kind of insignificant but really triumphant, like how these Black folks in my community, here or wherever I go, where I see, more melanated folks, it's like how um, are not only able to shape shift, but how are they able to um, create, keep creating things that are um, coming from the space of invention, coming from the space of joy, and so I really wanted to create that work, um, not out of the idea. A lot of times when I was in grad school, they really wanted me to kind of like, when you're in the Western institutions, they're trying to give you this false sense of space. It's that you need to master one thing, you need to concentrate on one specific medium or something like that, and they and I really, the way that I really think is in multiples. and I really could not. It was a really difficult. It was a really difficult experience for me being in that environment. And so those photographs are actually, those were just kind of like medicine for me when I made them at the time. You know,
Mm.
they were like just something that I needed to see and to remind me of like the origin, of the mother of mother, like where, and to honor her and to honor myself through her, and acknowledging that, we are a collection of our ancestors, we are a collection of our ancestors, and that, and not only that, that memory is in me. And so I had to, I had to conjure that up, and I had to make it from, materials that have a certain type of history and identity in itself for me, and meaning. And that was one of the things with the avocado, and that formerly, you know, and many other kind of materials. But yeah, that, when I look at those pieces, and I continue to work with the women, and I've created, along some other wearables, and with some of the, uncles, and, like, not blood, but just people in my community, that were really big in helping me to find my own medicine, to find my own mark, and to find that through material, and to find it through form and through lighting. So everything that I really do, and everything that I do shoot, I really feel like they're just kind of like, there are kind of little mini rituals. So that
Mm.
was literally something that we shot all night. We started off at nighttime, and that, I don't know, that space between night and day is like, and the water, it was just like I had no idea. And it was just something from inside that I had to make this, for my own, own artistic survival, you know. Uh,
Mm.
yep. So
So
thank you, when you, everyone.
it, you make it sound. I mean, it's so fascinating for me to hear you talk about your process as somebody who hasn't got a devoted artistic practice, because it's like channeling something that just needs to come out of you, and in expressing it in that way, one might be misled to think that it was a simple thing to do because it's just there. But I know it's not. And it takes, a fine tuning of process, a really keen listening for, and a juxtaposition of the different elements, and the right collaboration and everything. But the result speaks for itself, because it is created a very distinct language that people know you for now, and that has a very particular impact. Stephanie, I saw you nodding along to some of that, um, and your work similarly speaks to and uses makes use of the Black female body in particular, and with a focus on nudity and skin, and the use of light in really subtle but impactful ways. Can you share a bit about your sense of your reaction to the conversation around interdisciplinarity?
Yeah, for sure. Um, I really love the question because I am very intentional about like the answer, perhaps. But I think that interdisciplinary is often used interchangeably with multidisciplinary. And I think that there's a really distinct difference, at least for me. The different mediums or ways in which I might work are truly interwoven. So for me to just say multidisciplinary almost feels sporadic, but there's something very intentional for me when I say that I'm an interdisciplinary artist. I'm very intentional about how different mediums or concepts are interweaving and how they're working together. It's not a one or the other. And for me, that finally felt right for me in grad school. So I spent my undergraduate years with the focus in photography. And that is where I really fell in love with the body and fell in love with light. And I was nodding along a lot with what I was hearing because for me, light is so spiritual. My black and white work that I photograph is the most intuitive things that come out of me. Where if you kind of peruse my website, you might see other mediums and things that I've worked in, and interactive installation is something I'm very much so interested in right now too. But so much of that is like research based and very heavy. And the photography is conceptual too, but it's just different. Like my photography comes from in here. And it's an interaction and exchange that I get to have with the person who gives me the honor of being able to photograph them. So I'm really intentional and particular about who I bring into the studio and the relationship that we really build together in that moment. Most of the time, they're not people that I know. But for me, light is poetry, light is spiritual. And to have a completely dark space and let the light illustrate what is revealed or concealed, to me, is the visual poetry that I'm after. And I'm not a math person, but I see my work as very like geometrical, and I love that about the work, and that's really what I aim to do when I'm in the studio, when I'm photographing, when I'm moving around lights. And this style of work is something that I've done in the studio as well as outdoors as well, which I think takes it to a whole nother level when I'm working with direct sunlight. It's just as spiritual, but it's even more like intensified because of the natural elements as well. So I definitely do feel like I've arrived in a place now in my practice where not only can I very confidently say that I'm an interdisciplinary artist, but it all makes sense now. And I think because of my journey of starting with photography and then as my art practice evolved and I really found my voice in terms of what am I trying to say and communicate to the world as an artist, it allowed all of my different states to coexist together. And now I feel like because they're coexisting, I'm more confidently moving in between different spaces. I was honored and shocked when Jeremiah was like, they want the poem too. And I was like, what? They're like, yeah, like, I was like, what poem? He's like, the work that's there. Like, they want that too. And I'm like, oh, okay, great. And that is something I started in, I think, 2014. I started writing poetry in lieu of artist statements to go with my work because that felt right. I would struggle to like write a kind of traditional like statement about my work, but I could do it very easily in terms of poetry. So it's something that I just leaned into. But honestly, it wasn't until 2016, 2017 during grad school where I really started to own writing as a part of my interdisciplinary practice. It was still very much so something I was like, no, I'm a photographer. Like I make things and like, like I write because I have to. But if you look at all my work, it's just like, girl, you're a writer. Like, why are you writing this? So I do feel like I've come home in my art practice, and I feel like I've come home in my practice as an interdisciplinary artist. And things are stronger, things are more intentional, things are more directed. The more I really allowed all of my multiple states and my mindsets and my thought processes to live in harmony together and not necessarily in competition.
Wow. Really beautiful to hear. I think I just get moved by the impact that you all expressing your approach to your work has on your own state in speaking. You all seem to come alive and kind of express, like, it's like an exhalation, being allowed to speak about being interdisciplinary, being multiples, being infinite. And I'm going to bring this back to you, Jeremiah, because, you know, it strikes me that interdisciplinarity has a different resonance when it's coming from people who have that diasporic and that particular sense of Blackness, expansiveness. And as somebody who is dedicated to the empowerment and the upliftment of Black artists, do you see something of, it's not a trend, but it's just a reality of many of the artists working today, the, uh, having a similar sense of not wanting to pin themselves down to one particular mode of expression?
Very much so. And thank you all for expressing so honestly and sincerely how you approach your work. I think the creation of art is a very tender, very vulnerable and honest act. And there's a lot of bravery and courageousness that goes into not only making, but sharing. There's a great responsibility with that. And when I look at the culmination of this show and each of these artists that have spoken here, and even the other two who aren't with us here, Luanel, Havette, and Kay Hickman, all of them approach their work from a kind of multi-sensory, emotive immersion. And surrendering to that idea, I think, is inherently and organically Blackness. I say that in the sense that in a discussion in previous years, a question was posed on what is Africanness, you know? And I think Africanness, to Jamal's kind of background of understanding the difference of being African and then being Black, Blackness is a verb. It's an expression. It's a multiplicity of feelings and emotions and doing the best with whatever you have. And I think if you look at the post-colonial experience, so much of what we understand as Black culture, with a capital B, is the expression or the response to oppression or lack of even being able to articulate your ideas in more than one form, right? And the foundation for my organization, Ilekunwa, has been founded on that principle in and of itself, that we use the door, as you can see over my shoulder. I'm obsessed with doors as a metaphor for that liminality. And the ideas and the perception of what Blackness or creation can be, because the door on one side is one thing, on the other side it's another thing. It's an exit and an entryway, right? And I think when we understand creatives, depending on what side you may see, Stephanie, Luanel, or Jamal, or Alexis, or Jasmine, you may see them as a photographer, a filmmaker, a painter. But on the other side, they're still just as much a photographer, a painter, a filmmaker. But you're only getting one perspective just depending on where you are. And I think that is inherent to Black people. And the more that we have opportunities and platforms where we're not only able to have these conversations very candidly, we can explore those conversations through materiality. And I think that's of what each of these artists, are able to do, is to imagine, to dream, to orient themselves towards freedom through various different media, and invite different audiences to think critically about how they see their current state of Blackness and the evolution of Blackness to them today. Because I can tell myself and family members and even my wife, like, our journey to assimilating towards our ideas of Blackness and the communal understanding of Blackness is regional. whether it be Southern United States or, Brixton. Blackness is defined in so many different ways, and those contexts are moved. There are the modalities of language and material that help navigate those definitions. And I've been excited to see and being able to work with artists that are courageous enough to try a new or a different media without the idea of mastery, hindering them from exploring it. I think Blackness is naturally multi and interdisciplinary in the sense that we all have that one cousin, uncle, aunt who's had so many jobs and has done so many things because they are operating in the best versions of themselves. And not only that, they're also tapping into the intuitive nature of what it means to be themselves. And many times, in order to be yourself, you have to wear all the masks. You have to wear all the different costumes to emote what you dream at night. And I think that's the beauty of not just the show title, but the culmination of artists coming together and really having a conversation prior to this conversation in that room where all of these different ideas or states of Blackness are being revealed.
Beautifully said.
So beautifully said. And this multidisciplinary way of engaging with the question that your work facilitates also reflects the way in which Black Cultural Archives work. I have to bring it back home because obviously we create the space for people to engage with histories, to research, go into, a quiet research space and engage with the magazines, the organizational journals, etc. We also create spaces for people to learn through educational workshops. And then we have our exhibitions. And as you were speaking, I mean, this is so rich for personal development, potentially community development, this work as a springboard for conversations around personal and community development. And what I'm really interested to hear from any of the artists is creative ways in which they can see, whether they've done it already or which they would love to explore, to actually empower audiences who may not be well versed in thinking and talking about art, but to have some experience of empowerment personally or in terms of community, Black community, through their engagement with the work. Which is to say that if I had more time and some more research, and I have to say, shout out to our sponsors for this show, US Embassy, really, really amazing. But I could see us developing a really rich engagement program, particularly for young people in relationship to this work. And whether you have particular ideas for activities or conversations that you can imagine wanting to have.
Beautiful.
I actually have one. And hearing about the other artists' works more, I think it's all very like hand in hand. It's not necessarily medium specific, but with my focus in identity construction, I actually have an existing identity workshop where I invite people to explore the ways in which we perceive ourselves and how other people perceive us. So I kind of have some dialogue or we have dialogue together reflecting on that, whether they could be pet names, growing up Caribbean household, right? So like being called Lanky, and, different nicknames that you might have either from school or from family members. But then also, what terms do you have for yourself? How do you identify? It could be daughter, it could be cousin, it could be, mother, whatever. Like sometimes it's work related, sometimes it's occupational. But the whole idea is just to give people an opportunity to make a list of both words, because oftentimes we are submerged by all of these perceptions of who we're supposed to be. That I think the best types of workshops are opportunities that allow us to break out of preconceptions and break out of all of these biases that are just assumed and put on us because of the color of our skin. So in the workshop, people make a list of those two things, and then they're able to actually identify from both lists, both of how they perceive themselves and how others perceive them. They essentially get to pick from both lists, like a top 10 words that they feel best illustrate who they are. And the whole idea of that exercise is agency. And I hope that when people engage with my work, or even a show like this, that people are encouraged and empowered to dare to be themselves, and dare to step outside of a box that someone might have built around them. So when people are given the opportunity of agency to say, okay, I get to define who I am. But I think that the way we best define our own identity is by understanding the way we're perceived on the outside world. I don't have to live by the ways in which you prescribe me to be, or your expectations of my identity based on how I look, but I should be aware of that and cognizant of that. And I essentially get to take it with a grain of salt, and I get to step into who I decide I am. And I feel like by being conscientious of how other people perceive you, it allows you to move more confidently into the narrative that you want to live and just exist in. And I think not enough people of color just have the opportunity, or even sometimes think to do that exercise. I think in ways we're doing it a little bit through our like everyday lived experiences, and I think all the opportunities of representation help challenge that. But I think the more and more opportunities we can give people to just dare to be themselves, and really put a stake in the sand about, no, this is who I am. I think that's really empowering work.
Definitely. Using the tool of reflection as well to then choose and
Yeah.
to assert and declare. I love that.
I want to
And
oh, sorry. I wanted to piggyback off of that too. And I'm so happy that you're doing that. And I would have to say is that all the shows that I put on is always a component of interactive workshop. We created the last show that we did, and I don't ever do anything alone.
yeah.
Um, and the last project we're working on is House of Joy, where we just literally do various different, I just invite different people to present different ways in which they manifest joy. And the last one we're going to do is the basket weaving, and just having weaving from different people from from different parts of the world, and just have a picnic and enjoy ourselves. Um, One of my favorite was actually the Black love stories. We did a film on Black love from different parts of the African diaspora like 10 years ago, but then we recorded actually people's responses to their own love stories in their life as like a kind of archive. And I'm just so happy to hear about Stephanie doing things, and I'm hoping, because I feel like a lot of times as artists we're kind of centered around surviving, but it's been such um, a pleasure for me to get a response. Like I really enjoy getting an interactive response from the audience, and not only the participants that I'm, playing with. I love collaborating, and I don't know, like where my practice would be without collaborating. Even if I'm taking a still image, I'm collaborating with the subject, of the materials and the sky and the water, So yeah, I don't know what, yeah, I don't yeah, the audience, the work wouldn't be activated if we don't have the audience. So
So critical. It has me thinking of hold tight my BCA team, ways we can keep the conversation of a reflection on States of Blackness going, because it's so core to the work that we do. I mean, it could just be one of the strands of the way that we seek to empower people through their reflection on the archive, for them to use that material to reflect on their experience of their own identity at any particular time. I don't want to assume that Alexis and Jamalda have specific things. Did you have any reflections on the way in which you can collaborate with audiences to activate your work?
I mean, I love that invitation. I think as part of community organizing, that's really important in any creative practice, to engage with the community and have them find ways to develop themselves, and have self-discovery. I mean, that's something that I have been trying to find ways to incorporate in exhibitions, to have a more interactive element, besides sound, um, to have a way for people to be aware and present and be more investigative of their dreams. But I'm still formulating that. I mean, one thing that I did was, I put a bed in the gallery, and I wanted to invite people to lay on it, while they were to give this intimate space, and this relaxed space, and have them feel like a sense of dreaming, and a sense of sleep, and investigating what our dreams mean, and what that other subconsciousness represents. But yeah, this is still early in development. I wanted to, if I could go back to something that Jasmine said, much earlier in the conversation. She said making work in response to annihilation, and she said that words are spells. And I wanted to have her talk more about that, words being spells. I think that's really a really important acknowledgement because so much of what we've talked about in this conversation is, all the artists here seem to be responding to trauma, and Jasmine was speaking on finding, the joy and going beyond that trauma. So there's a lot of critical thought in recent years about Afro pessimism, and a lot of this inescapable dread that comes with being in this state of blackness. And I was wondering if Jasmine had any more words in regards to that idea of words being spells, and how the aspirational, but I'll let her like continue on that.
No, honestly, I don't know. I mean, it's something um, that I have experienced in my own lineage of how powerful our thoughts are, and
Yeah,
how powerful our words are, and how literally they manifest. And it is not to say that I don't think that we shouldn't concentrate or communicate or shout out or make work about things that are oppressive systems. I just think at the same time is that we are so um, far from ourself, from this oppression, that we actually have to um, kind of really go deep into something else that that is in us. And it's so fascinating for me when um, when I've done projects when going from Guatemala to Ethiopia to Detroit, and I see certain movements or
hmm,
dance movements or just things that um, the youth especially, that they have no idea like where it's coming from or what they're doing, or even the gold teeth that they wearing, you know. And so um, and so for myself, and for what has been working for me, is that I'm just really thinking about, the metaphysics, and um, like how we can actually, um, how are we actually going to get out of this narrative of oppression, and how are we going to have this transferring of power? Like, we are so incredibly powerful. Oh
yeah,
my God.
right,
You know what I mean? The source, the origin, the
yeah,
light, and I just don't, I'm just like, no, it's nothing that can stop me. It's nothing that,
yeah,
in me, and, my, like, it's no. And if I I I don't know. Like that I will not accept, that narrative. And coming from Detroit, my parents were Pan Africanists, and we were actually forced to read a lot of things, um, and hear a lot of things. And I think they getting educated on certain systemic things that keep happening is important. But I think what happens too is that there's a narrative of those things, and then they start to circle. They start to just become the only thing, and you're missing something that is really essential to kind of breaking that cycle. And so
Right.
um, I don't have the answer, Brother Jamal. Like I don't,
I need an answer. Give me a
I
give me an
don't.
answer.
But maybe collectively we can all, have something that'll scratch the surface of this mess.
I think all of what we're doing scratches the surface for sure.
Mhm.
And I think so much of the way we language what we're doing, how we position ourselves. I'm always very intentional of saying global majority, opposed
Mm.
to the very Western American perspective of being a minority. And depending on what country you're in, that could be the case. But when we think of ourselves as a global majority, there's something uplifting about that type of language.
Mm.
And I love what you were saying, Jasmine, about when you are more educated on some things that have happened in the past, you start to see these patterns and the cycles. But what is that thing that's going to allow you to think differently about, like, oh, it is what it is, right? Or nothing's going to change, kind of thing. So I think it is important for us to um, pull from what's happening historically or from those cycles, but look forward to like how we're moving that forward. So I
Mm.
always like to think for myself, not only just as an artist, but as a being existing in this world, how am I embodying Sankofa and all of the work that I'm doing? How am I learning from my ancestry, learning from my past, whether no matter where that might be geographically, and how am I moving the narrative forward? And I think that we're all capable of contributing to that um, across the board in a way that does allow us to move the narrative forward. Because there is a similarity across the world. People who look like us are experiencing some type of othering, or
Mhm.
some type of marginalization, and it's different. It's really not the same everywhere across the globe, but there's some level of it. And I
Right.
don't think that's not just a coincidence. Like, that's
No.
happening for a reason. And I think as we bring more light to those scenarios, then we have opportunities to change the narratives. This was a few years ago, but it's very uplifting to hear people in the Philippines or Southeast Asia starting to move against, like skin coloring mechanisms and things like that. So things are moving, right? But it's more about how do we continue to surface those conversations and challenge people to not necessarily continue in old practices and behaviors that continue to marginalize us. And I want to tap onto what Jamal and Jasmine were saying. Jamal, you mentioned this sort of Afro pessimism. Is that the word you use?
Yes.
Okay, Afro pessimism. Um, and I think this will also answer something of what you were asking as well, Lisa, about creative ways of engaging our audience and allowing them to sort of use it as a tool in their
Yes.
enlightenment or development. So I think it's a challenge for us as artists, especially Black or artists of the African diaspora, when we are, and I won't say this is true for everyone, but I see that there's sort of this like pattern where the beginning of, or a point where we relate in a lot of ways, has to do with that sort of trauma.
Mhm.
And for me personally, in my own arts practice, when I first started thinking about Blackness, the beginning, the place where my landing point was, I started with trauma. It was the place that kind of resonated with me internally, and in a way that I knew I had some sort of connected relationship. We were all sharing it. And that was kind of like my jumping off point into examining the ways of thinking about it. But as I continue sort of working through these ideas and thinking about like ownership of our narrative, and Stephanie mentioned this sort of authorship and agency in our narrative. The more I continued working through these ideas, from 2015 to now, I'm still continuing to think about this sort of ownership, and creating these places in my own narrative about Blackness, creating these places, or thinking about these planes of existence in which we get to sort of have the authorship around the narrative, and how we get to exist, and how we get to think about ourselves, and how we get to think about our history and our futures even. And so I'm currently reading this book called Black Utopias by Jana Brown. And in it, I'm just beginning to read it, but she has started talking about because Black people throughout the entire world have always been neglected, our humanity has always been neglected. In a way, it kind of positions us in this really sort of powerful position, because if you will deny our humanity, that sort of gives us a sort of power to completely deny whatever the narrative that has been created for us altogether. And because we get to do that, we get to reimagine a sort of utopia or a sort of place of euphoria, and even really kind of denying just like what it means to sort of live in a Black body, but not deny it in a way that is a denial of our being or anything, but reinterpret our being in a way that makes us more powerful. And I don't want to misquote her, but I encourage the artists that are on this panel and other artists that are in the exhibition to check it out. It's a really interesting book, but I'm really interested in thinking about that. If no one has drafted or crafted this landscape for how we can exist, and we get to remove any sort of interpretation, it kind of frees us up to have this completely reimagined agency about what it means to be. And so, in addition to having this new landscape of what it means to be, in my work in general, currently, I think I'm always sort of inviting viewers to it requires some sort of internal heavy lifting. And I think it does that for me as well. It's always teaching me something to kind of sit with the work. And I think I'm always wanting that for the viewer as well. You have to do some sort of internal digging and internal re-navigation, rewiring of your brain and your thinking. And so that's the kind of way that I think about creative ways to help viewers sort of engage with the work. Well, in engage with the work that's sort of two-dimensional or moving image. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
You've all given me lots of ideas about the way in which I can intentionally program space for critical thinking, reflection, and engagement with works going forwards in a way that can serve people's development. I think it has to be core. So yeah, definitely learning a lot from you all. And I have a couple of kind of questions to kind of close us out. What am I going to start with? The first one is really to do with the power of the archive. You've all talked about the ways in which, obviously, you're influenced by your engagement with the past in, developing your own kind of artistic languages. But what I'm really interested to know more about is how you are intentionally archiving your own work and how you want your work to be framed for posterity, and the service that organizations like Black Cultural Archives can provide in doing that in a way that really honors the purpose of your work. This is something that I'm really engaged. Well, not only as an archive, we don't collect art, but we do honor culture. And for me, one of the most powerful vessels for culture is artistic practice. So it's something to think about. It's a question I think people who come to the archives will be concerned about, culture makers. So it's a really relevant conversation, particularly as we talk about the power of the kind of liberatory critical thinking that your work allows for. How can we make sure that that power is properly framed and documented for the future, for people to build on?
Who wants to go first?
Yeah.
I could talk about it. I mean, to be honest, I'm always really thinking about like permanence and impermanence and what should remain. And when I think about if I what I want to be left behind, I really, and I'm always thinking about like those things, even, as an artist, like what will happen to these materials after I'm gone, even if someone's purchased them, or even an institution. And I think for myself, it's nice to have things archived. And but from working with institutions and working with museums, I prefer, to be honest, is to, I think the best archival is the body. I think if I can give my work an experience to an audience, that it can spread like a seed into the youth, and it can grow and it can manifest and to keep going, I'm fine with that. And I don't really know if everything is supposed to last forever. And I don't know where this idea, I feel like maybe I don't know the answer, but I'm just questioning the answer because I feel like it's a really kind of Western monument kind of idea. But I do think it is important, um, especially so much that I am inspired from, African culture, and I get really frustrated that I don't have access to it. Um, because of things being archived. So I'm just playing off of those things. I'm not really sure if I know the answer, but that's where I am right now.
I share similar sentiments, specifically in regards to the frustration between identifying this Western perspective of like needing to have ownership, like who came up with this first and what's it called, and like, our nomenclature for things. But also, as I've been wanting to dig into my own ancestry and, other aspects of cultures unknown to me, just because of literally generations of time, my only option is to go like find like the feet of an elder to like sit at and hear from. But that requires finding that person and traveling to that place, because I cannot necessarily rely on the European explanations and depictions of things online. So I do think that I would love to see a balance of the two. I think that there's something really beautiful about like what we see in Africa with like oral cultures and oral traditions and things being passed down in that way. I don't know that it necessarily needs to be written, but I would love to like hear those things. I also do think like an organization like yours is helpful because it's hard to know who to trust. You have access to so much archival information online, but if it's coming from a white European anthropologist, who's referring to my ancestors as Arawaks, and others are referring to them as Taino, then I don't know. So I do think there being some type of balance is helpful. And digital archive might be the start of thinking about a way of doing that.
I mean, I've been hearing a lot of talk lately about archives in the art world specifically. It seems like a very sort of sexy idea and topic, and a lot of people are converging on it because there is this conversation that's happening about who owns objects, cultural artifacts, and how do they get returned. I mean, in my own work as a filmmaker and a documentary maker, I love the idea of oral traditions and just being able to sit at the feet of our elders, such as Stephanie was just saying, and then being able to document and record them, and to have that wisdom be passed on to the next generation, and just having the authorship and having an author uh, way of you're in control of these archives and these images, and you're sharing them and you're making them available for other people to either learn from and to have their ancestral histories be shared and represented. So I would say film in a way, is very powerful in that way because there is not a materiality. It's a digital file that can last generations, and I love the concept of someone finding it 100 years later and and relearning something. So that's sort of my way of approaching it.
Yeah.
I'll hop in. Oh, okay. Go ahead, Alexis.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I also sort of think about it as these like a digital archive, and I usually think about it with the moving images or photography. I also kind of think about it with installation, like they're keeping these sort of installation works and being able to recreate experiences for people, kind of what Jasmine said, but being able to recreate these experiences. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
I also think about another artist who isn't present here, Luanel, who's from Liberia. A lot of her work is inspired about freedom of the female body and form, but narratives, particularly from her grandmother, right? So as those stories are being passed down to us as artists, how do we emote? How do we make? How do we give form to things that we've heard, seen, or experienced? That is a form of archiving, to the point of Stephanie and everybody else here. Kind of the Western canonization is about collecting and conquest. How much can I store and invite you to come here and pay for this experience?
Right.
But I think the power of exhibitions and stories and artists making and communing over what they make is an archive itself. It is the memory, which is one of the most powerful elements we all have. It motivates us, even the trauma, it's like there's a recorded memory physically that affects our body, that adjusts us to move in the world and respond to certain things specifically. So how do we think about the experiences that are centric to how we see and understand our own cultures from various different geographies, neighborhoods, and nooks in the world, and then bring a little bit of Jackson, Mississippi, Lagos, Nigeria, Brooklyn, Atlanta, and coalesce all of that just in this conversation. Like the memory of talking to each of you, I can now carry. And recreating new futures and new opportunities, perhaps new installations, exhibitions, and other things, that memory is going to stay with me because I connected with someone's, So there may be considered an ephemeral nature when you don't document in the way that, modern history has told us we should. But more often than not, the documentation begins and is enough just by sharing. because someone is affected and feels something. And that feeling is recorded history. And that is the first archive that actually brings us all together.
Wow, that was a beautiful note to end on. But I had another question. So beautifully said, Jeremiah, in typical style. Yes, the memory of this conversation is going to live on forever with me, and it's also going to live on forever on YouTube. So make sure you'll be sharing the link to this so you can share this conversation with your own communities and audiences in the future, because I think it's been such a nourishing conversation. And the last point I wanted to really finish up with really was about the intentionality of building community. This is something I'm personally really passionate about, and I get a lot of joy by just being in the midst of all of you guys connecting. And I can see like brain cells just fizzing in the kind of the synergy between your ideas and your practices. And so I want to hear a bit about how you intentionally build community and support yourself with community in your practice for the long term, just because it may inspire others and it may inspire you guys to connect intentionally after this so that there can be some legacy collaborations as a result of this exhibition and conversation.
Oh, that's a beautiful invitation. Thank you, Lisa. Presently based in Los Angeles, and Los Angeles is way too large and sprawling, and you have to be very intentional about building community here. And if like someone lives on the west side and you live on the east side, they're like, okay, if you meet them, they're like, I'm never going to see you, so I'm not even going to try to stay in touch with you. Yeah, it's bad. But what I tried to do in lieu of that, I tried to host like creative dinners. I mean, I love connecting people. I love connecting artists. So I would have like a dinner and invite people from all over, artists from all over, and get together and have a nice meal that evening. And that's one way which I haven't done in a while, and I'm hoping to do one again the next couple of months or so. But I find that energetically it's very nourishing, and I love seeing just good people get together and potential collaborations happen from those meetings. So that's been my approach in trying to build community, and then also just going to other artists' exhibitions and installations and sharing their work if I can, and trying to connect with them individually.
And then collaborating with them to create work, like you did with the piece that you have in our show.
Yes, yeah. I love collaborating with people, so that's something that's just part of who I am.
Well, this is an invitation to all of you. I mean, already Stephanie is coming over, Alexa's come over. Make sure you come and say hello to Black Cultural Archives whenever you come to London. It's a must, and definitely connect. Yeah. Anyway, we can continue this off the actual YouTube. But yeah, Alexis, Jasmine, Stephanie, anything else? I mean, you've all spoken about the power of collaboration, but if you have any last words on that, it would be lovely to hear. Then maybe for Jeremiah.
Okay. I'll say lastly, I really enjoy being a conduit, even though administratively, many of you who know, it's challenging to get the connections done. Just made some recent connections for Stephanie that I promised her weeks ago, but I'm glad that came to pass. But being based in New York and in Brooklyn, I know I've had the joy of seeing you, Lisa. You connected me to Jasmine last year. That Brooklyn, Brixton, Bed-Stuy connection is strong. So I was able to extend my creative family by meeting Jasmine. But as someone who particularly spends time listening, learning, uplifting, supporting artists of African descent, I try my best to make those connections and build accountability to your ideas. Because sometimes we are often discouraged by the things that we think we cannot make, but when conversation with a community, especially ones that are oriented in different approaches, we feel stronger and more empowered to act on the things that we know are best, not just for ourselves, but for the world. So I welcome all of you to ask me for an introduction.
And so I'm going to close us out by saying, well, it's been my extreme pleasure to facilitate at least this forum for you all to connect. I hope you do connect going forwards. I'm very much inspired having a deeper insight into your work to see how your work could interact with other artists that are based here in the UK as well, and facilitating that kind of cross-Atlantic exchange more intentionally. So we'll look to that in the future. But for now, just want to say a massive thank you to you all for choosing to collaborate with Black Cultural Archives and have your work shown together in a really, really uplifting and important way that I know will be treasured for years to come. I wish you all the very best, peace and power to you all. And yeah, I look forward to conversing with you all individually in the future. Thanks again.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Bye.